welcome back to our ongoing series, Meeting Jesus. After a couple of weeks off at Holy Week and the week following Easter, we're resuming with our weekly Thursday afternoon in-person Bible study, walking through the Gospel according to Mark, and these accompanying summary conversations. And as we pick back up, we're going to be delving into what we call Mark chapter 7 this time, and to set the table for us, we're at in some ways a natural break point, that we came through one set of stories and we're going to move in a slightly different trajectory as we move into Mark 7. But it's worth remembering that even in the material we've covered so far, as we've been introduced to Jesus, he's never really been all that comfortable with pretenders, but he's always been open to people who can be honest and truthful. And maybe the biggest transformations Jesus works in people are for people who are ready to be honest about their need, their situation, their story, even their doubts or their questions. And Jesus has the least room and least interest in getting into debates with pretenders. So often, when Jesus hangs out with the ones who are labeled as sinners or outcasts or tax collectors, Jesus can be honest. At least these people are willing to name they've got a need. At least these people are willing to own who they are. It's the respectable religious people who like to put on this veneer of piety and poke at other people that always seem to get under Jesus' skin and provoke the sharpest reaction from Jesus. So hopefully that sort of frames the first part of chapter 7 in Mark's gospel, where Jesus has this sort of controversy with some of the respectable religious people of his century, of his time and his community. It's worth remembering that in Judaism in the first century, it's not monolithic. It's not that all people of the Jewish faith and ancestry in the first century all believe or practice the exact same way that Christians have a really wide variety of practices, even just right in our community, right here in Lucas County, right here in North America. Christianity ranges from high liturgical precision with incense and candles and liturgical calendars to very, very low church, casual, put together spur of the moment, to people whose worship practices vary, to people whose social or discipleship practices look different. There are Christians who say you can't drink or gamble or go roller skating, and others who are happy to find themselves at the local bar hanging out with all the disrespectable people in their town. Christian practice is varied and different, and so was no different in the first century in Judaism. And so every so often we get these windows into the diverse branches of thought and practice in first century Judaism. And one of those particular branches that often gets associated with a group called the Pharisees had a particular focus on practical, everyday living out your piety toward God. And that often showed up in very precise concern and attention to detail to practice of ritual laws, along with deep concern for practice of justice and mercy and keeping the commandments toward care for other people and doing right and not sinning. But that also meant that they were very, very concerned to practice the ritual laws about cleansing and purity and cleanness and uncleanness that are there in ancient Israel's commandments, there in the Torah. But these were places where the Pharisees felt like everybody could practice this part of their faith, right? Only a select few people really were involved in offering sacrifices in the temple, right? Only very few people were involved in actually constructing laws or legislating. But everybody could be involved in the day-to-day, keep clean and avoid things that make you unclean. The Pharisees, sometimes Christians have painted them as villains, and it's not so much that they're villains as Jesus sees that it's really easy for them to focus on outward appearance stuff and not to care about actual people or not to care about what's deeper. And so when Jesus has criticism for the Pharisees in a story like we'll get in Mark 7, I don't want us to hear this as Jesus the good guy against Pharisee villains, so much as these are different parties, different groups, different almost denominations within Judaism. And Jesus is offering a different perspective, saying if you get so focused on ritual washing of your hands or of your food or of your kitchenware or things like that, it's possible you can so focus, you can major on the minors, that you end up missing what most deeply matters, justice and mercy and caring for actual people. So the story that unfolds there in Mark chapter 7 involves the Pharisees, a group of them, noticing that Jesus' disciples weren't practicing all the levels of ritual cleansing, right? Weren't ritually washing their hands, and then asking Jesus, how come this doesn't matter to you? They're not following the tradition of washing your hands before you eat. And again, it's not that Jesus is opposed to cleanliness or opposed to washing your hands, so much as Jesus thinks that this is the battle you're gonna pick. This is the fight that matters to you, is whether my disciples wash their hands. Meanwhile, we're all comfortable with injustice or letting other people go hungry or without what they need for life. Let's focus on what matters, people. So Jesus responds to these Pharisees, again, not saying, I refuse to wash my hands and you can't make me, but more to say, why is this the hill you're willing to die on? Why, of all the things you think our faith in God is about, it boils down to whether you did or didn't wash your hands before you ate? How about we focus on taking care of the people around us? And Jesus then notes how easy it is for religious people to invent loopholes or reasons or ways to use their understanding of religion to make them the good guys and also to get away with rotten crookedness toward others. He points out a particular example of how easy it was if you wanted to misuse or abuse the law this way. You could end up leaving your family members out to dry instead of taking care of your family members and saying, well, the money that I would have taken care of you with, Mom and Dad, I've dedicated to God. I can keep living off of it, but it's dedicated to God, so I can't use it to take care of my aging parents. And Jesus will say things like, that doesn't seem right. We should be taking care of the people who are entrusted into our care and not worried about whether God is accepting of how much we've washed our hands or our kitchen utensils. Jesus, again, isn't saying the Pharisees are going to hell, but more to say, you seem to be focusing on the little piddly stuff, and the big stuff that should matter, you seem to be okay with ignoring. Jesus is interested in people being genuine and real, and not in being pretenders, right? Who put on a show for other people, for themselves, for God, and missing out on what really matters, justice and mercy toward actual other human beings. Is why, by contrast, when Jesus then goes on and leaves his native Jewish territory, and then the next scene goes into the Gentile region of Tyre and meets a woman who is of Syro-Phoenician origin. That's Gentile, right? She's not Jewish, and she's heard about Jesus from somewhere, and she starts pleading, begging that Jesus help her daughter who's troubled by an unclean spirit. And maybe because Jesus has just had this interaction with other respectable religious people, it sort of pushes back at her, like to see, is this woman genuinely interested in me, or is she just putting on a show because that's what she's heard other people do? And he's initially not interested in helping her, right? His initial response seems to be, let the children be fed first. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. And she answers him, okay, Jesus, but even the dogs eat the food that fall from the children's crumbs that fall from the table. And Jesus realizes this woman is genuine, right? She's not pretending. She's not putting on a show. She's in genuine, deep need, and she's come to Jesus. Jesus sees genuine, real faith in her and heals her daughter instantly in that moment. Jesus can work with people, even if they're brusque, even if they are rude, even if they're brash, if they're genuine and being authentic with him. It's the religious pretending Jesus has a lot harder time with and a whole lot less patience for. In a scene like this story, where Jesus, again, comes kind of rudely to this woman who's asked for help, it's worth noting that Jesus chooses to go into this Gentile territory, and that some part of me thinks Jesus had to know what he was getting into, right? If you take a trip to Paris and you were surprised that you run across people who are speaking French, that's on you, right? You should know. If you go to Paris, people are going to be speaking French. That's in France, right? Similarly, if Jesus goes into Gentile territory and is approached by someone who's Gentile looking for help, Jesus had to know this was a moment where he was going to have this kind of encounter. I think even though it comes off at first like Jesus is being rude to this woman, I think in a sense this is Jesus sort of having a moment to make the choice. Does my movement include everybody? Up to this point, Jesus could have plausibly said, I really only come for people who are like me, people who are from Jewish ancestry and background and language and culture, and even for all of our little inter-party disputes or disagreements, we all have the same heritage. By Jesus deliberately crossing into Gentile territory and deliberately letting himself be open to this conversation, Jesus is making the intentional choice here to say, this is about everybody. God is doing something new that includes all kinds of people. Jewish people, sure. Gentile people, people from near, people from far, people who speak different languages, different skin colors, different cultures, all those things. In a moment like this, Jesus makes it clear his movement isn't staying put inside one sect or group or nationality or culture, but that he is intentionally inviting this might reach everywhere. And for anybody of Gentile ancestry who's now a follower of Jesus, that includes me and an awful lot of us in the Christian community today, our reason for belonging is because of this encounter. Our reason for belonging is, one, the faith of this woman who approaches Jesus in a no-nonsense, no-holds-barred, the gloves are off kind of conversation, and also that Jesus has deliberately left himself open for this kind of encounter that pulls him into saying, no, this is for everybody now. If we didn't know it for sure before, now we sure do. God's reign, God's new thing, the Christian community, the beloved community, is for everybody. So that's where our conversation is going to begin as we take another look here in Mark 7 and continue our Meeting Jesus series. We hope you'll join us. If you can be a part of that conversation in person, starting at 1 o'clock on Thursdays here at Community of Christ, join us here or catch up with these weekly video summaries. Anyway, thanks for joining us on this journey.